The banquet hall glowed under the warm golden light of a dozen chandeliers, but the icy tension clinging to the long, linen-covered table could have chilled wine. Natalie readjusted the cloth napkin on her lap, her practiced smile frozen in place as the voice of her father-in-law, Richard Pendleton, boomed across the room. "Another year down, and still toying around with that little side project, huh, Natalie?" he said, loud enough for every person seated at the long holiday table to hear. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Champagne flutes were lifted and then forgotten. Natalie felt her husband, Julian, gently squeeze her knee beneath the table, a silent gesture of support he learned to perfect after 4 years of holiday dinners with the Pendleton clan. They were old money. Fifth-generation financiers. Real estate barons. Country club royalty. And they never let her forget that she was something else entirely. "I wouldn't say it's a side project," Natalie said, keeping her tone composed. "It's grown quite a bit this year." Her voice was calm, but beneath the surface, her blood simmered. Aunt Sylvia tilted her head, feigning curiosity. "Oh, you mean that crafting website? What is it again, Pretty Pineapple?" "Such a cute name." "Prairie Halo," Natalie corrected with a patient smile. "And we've expanded well beyond crafts." The clink of silverware paused as Richard let out a short, sharp chuckle. "Well, forgive me if I don't quite grasp how knitting kits and bath bombs are supposed to change the world. You graduated summa cum laude from Columbia. You could have been a partner at Pendleton and Hart by now." Natalie sipped her wine and bit back a sigh. She'd rehearsed this scene in her head too many times, how she'd calmly reveal what she was building, how their faces would morph from smug to stunned. But tonight wasn't the time for that. Not yet. "Some things grow better outside the box," she said simply. Julian reached for her hand again under the table. His support meant everything, especially since he was one of the only people who knew what Prairie Halo truly was. To the world, it was a cozy lifestyle brand, home goods, artisanal wellness products, a social media presence that looked handmade and heartfelt. But behind the brand was something far more powerful, a full-service digital logistics platform disguised as a storefront. Prairie Halo had evolved into a back-end juggernaut, powering hundreds of small businesses across 4 continents. Payment processing. Fulfillment. Customer analytics. Scalable API integrations. It was the kind of company Richard Pendleton would have invested in, if only it wore a navy suit and didn't have lavender logos. "Still playing with influencers, dear?" asked Margaret, Julian's mother, swirling her wine. "They do make for such charming photos." Natalie smiled thinly. "Actually, I have a fairly important meeting tomorrow morning. So I'll need to call it an early night." "A board meeting at the craft store?" Richard smirked. Julian cleared his throat and, to Natalie's surprise, decided to speak up. "It's not a craft store, Dad. Natalie's been asked to present to the executive committee at Haverton Bank." The table fell silent. Even the waitstaff seemed to pause. "Haverton?" Richard's voice dipped. "That's not possible." Natalie looked across the table and locked eyes with him. "They approached me 3 months ago to consult on their digital infrastructure overhaul." Richard blinked. "That's ridiculous." "No, what's ridiculous is how far behind Haverton, and most legacy banks, are," she said. "Over 70% of banking interactions now take place online. Yet many institutions still rely on systems built in the early 2000s. Margaret gave a nervous laugh. "Surely they're not taking advice from a boutique brand." Natalie leaned in, her voice soft but certain. "You'd be surprised what you learn running a network of 500+ independent online retailers. Real-time data, behavior trends, payment flow optimization, fraud detection. Prairie Halo is the testing ground for something much larger." Richard's eyes narrowed. He didn't know what to say, which for him was rare. Natalie didn't gloat. She simply folded her napkin and stood. "Excuse me," she said with a polite nod. "I need to prepare for tomorrow." The hall was silent as she left. The drive home through the wooded Connecticut backroads was quiet at first. Julian kept one hand on the steering wheel and one on her thigh. Then he burst into laughter. "Did you see Dad's face? He looked like someone told him the Dow crashed." Natalie let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. He's going to lose his mind when he sees what's in the deck. Do you think it's time? Julian asked. To tell them everything? She looked out the window at the moonlit lake near their modern hillside home. They won't believe it until they see it. She wasn't being dramatic. Prairie Halo was just the front. The real business, Nestra Systems, was built in silence, one contract at a time. A cloud-native infrastructure company disguised under soft branding and subtle user experiences. Nestra didn't just support digital businesses, it ran them. And tomorrow, she would propose the full integration of Nestra's back-end architecture into Haverton Bank's crumbling digital framework. She unlocked her office safe and pulled out the proposal packet. Nestra wasn't being acquired. It was absorbing Haverton. And the Pendleton family? They were about to discover that the woman they'd mocked at the dinner table for 4 years was now the architect of their future. At precisely 8:42 a.m., Natalie Reed stood before the towering glass facade of Haverton Bank's global headquarters in downtown Boston. The morning sun glanced off its steel edges like the sharp corners of tradition, refined, proud, and perilously outdated. She took a moment to center herself, adjusted the silver pendant at her neck, an heirloom from her late mother, and stepped through the revolving doors. Her heels echoed across the polished marble floor as she entered a world that had always looked down on hers. The receptionist greeted her with hesitation. She wasn't wearing a power suit with shoulder pads. No flashy luxury handbag. Just a sleek slate gray blazer and a simple digital tablet tucked under one arm. "I'm here for the 9 a.m. strategy session with the executive committee," she said calmly, showing her credentials. The woman checked her list. Her brows lifted subtly. "Of course, Ms. Reed. Top floor. They're expecting you." As Natalie rode the elevator alone, her reflection stared back at her from the metal walls. This was the moment. After 3 years of hiding in plain sight, building Nestra Systems behind the soft shell of Prairie Halo, she was about to speak the truth aloud to a room full of powerful men and women who had never seen her coming. The doors opened with a soft chime. The boardroom was a capsule of generational wealth. Mahogany panels lined the walls, oil paintings of old men in even older suits gazed down from gilded frames. A long oval table stretched across the room, surrounded by chairs that seemed less for comfort and more for status. She was 10 minutes early, but half the board was already seated. Carl Vincent, CEO of Haverton, stood near the windows arranging slides on a display screen. He gave her a small, grateful nod when she entered. They'd met 6 months ago, after one of Haverton's junior product managers stumbled across Prairie Halo's back-end analytics during a case study on micro-retail logistics. What started as a coffee meeting turned into months of quiet strategy discussions. Carl had connected the dots. Prairie Halo wasn't just a shop, it was a front in disguise for Nestra Systems, a quiet force with over 600 active platform clients and digital infrastructure light years ahead of anything Haverton could offer. His bank, once a giant, had been steadily bleeding customers to fintech disruptors for nearly a decade. He was desperate for reinvention, and Natalie was his wild card. By 9 a.m., the boardroom was full. 12 people. 11 suits. And Richard Pendleton. He walked in 5 minutes late, as he always did, holding a leather binder and a stainless steel coffee tumbler engraved with the Pendleton and Hart crest. When he saw Natalie seated beside Carl at the head of the table, he stopped mid-step. "What is she doing here?" he snapped. Natalie looked up, meeting his eyes without blinking. "Good morning, Richard." Carl spoke up, voice neutral. "Natalie's presence is essential to today's presentation." "She's your consultant?" Richard said, incredulous. "You're letting an Etsy shop owner weigh in on the digital strategy for Haverton Bank?" The murmurs began. A few confused glances. Some amused. One or two skeptical. Natalie stood slowly, unbothered by the sneers. "Before we begin," she said, "let me clarify something." She tapped the tablet in her hand, and the screen behind her came to life. It displayed a sleek dashboard of real-time financial metrics, processing speeds, fraud detection efficiency, user retention graphs, numbers that didn't just suggest success, they screamed it. "My name is Natalie Reed, and I'm the founder and CEO of Nestra Systems. What began as Prairie Halo 3 years ago evolved into a digital-first architecture platform designed to support modern commerce. Today, Nestra handles over 400 million customer sessions a month and processes more than $20 billion in financial transactions annually. A beat. Our platform has been quietly powering some of the most agile digital companies in Europe, Southeast Asia, and North America. We serve as the backbone for emerging fintech platforms, and now, we are offering Haverton a complete infrastructure upgrade, without compromising your identity as a legacy institution. Richard's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The boardroom was silent. Carl stood beside her now. As part of this partnership, Nestra Systems will take over full digital infrastructure operations, under Haverton's name. We keep the legacy. We replace the bones. Natalie clicked to the next slide. A side-by-side comparison appeared, Haverton's current digital performance versus projected metrics post-integration with Nestra. The differences were staggering. Legacy banks are not failing because of lack of experience, Natalie said. They're failing because they believe experience is enough. But experience doesn't scale. Data does. She turned to face the room, locking eyes with each board member. You've been losing customers for 8 years. Not because your services are bad, but because your systems are slow, inaccessible, and out of sync with what modern users expect. We can fix that. A woman at the far end, Eleanor Stroud, the bank's longest tenured board member, leaned forward. You mean to say you built all of this under a lifestyle brand? Natalie nodded. It was the perfect test environment. Real customers. Real data. No boardrooms slowing innovation. We iterated weekly, sometimes daily. Every product was a Trojan horse for back-end testing. Every sale generated feedback for machine learning. We didn't sell candles, we sold future-proof systems. Carl handed out sealed folders to each board member. Inside, you'll find the full terms. Nestra won't own Haverton. It will simply be the engine beneath it. You'll retain your image. But you'll finally have the power to compete. Richard couldn't contain himself any longer. This is outrageous. You can't let her do this. She's not qualified. I think she's more than qualified, Eleanor said, flipping through the folder. She built what we've been trying to license for 5 years. She's my daughter-in-law, Richard hissed. She's your daughter-in-law, Eleanor repeated flatly, and she's about to save your legacy. Natalie stood silently, letting the words settle. Because it was true. She wasn't there for revenge. Or validation. Or a seat at someone else's table. She had built her own. By the end of the meeting, the vote was unanimous. Nestra Systems would be integrated. Natalie would serve as Chief Digital Strategy Officer under a renewable contract, answering only to the board. As the members filtered out, one by one offering handshakes and congratulations, Richard lingered at the window, arms crossed. You humiliated me, he muttered, eyes still locked on the skyline. No, Natalie said softly, gathering her tablet. You did that when you decided the only businesses worth respecting wore cufflinks. She left him there, still struggling to understand how the woman he once belittled at Thanksgiving dinner had become the architect of his survival. The news broke just before noon. Legacy Bank partners with underground fintech star in bold digital pivot. Prairie Halo founder revealed as CEO behind Nestra Systems. The quiet takeover that might save a century-old bank. Natalie Reed's name was everywhere. And not just on startup blogs or the tech section. She was trending on financial news networks. Her inbox overflowed with speaking requests, podcast interviews, and a flurry of LinkedIn connection invites from people who used to overlook her at networking events. By 2 p.m., she was back in what had once been Richard Pendleton's corner office, now hers. The room still smelled faintly of cedarwood and overpriced cigars. She hadn't had time to redecorate yet, but she'd already replaced the framed Pendleton and Hart Legacy Leader Award with a minimalist blueprint of Nestra's core framework. Julian appeared in the doorway with a triumphant grin and a sandwich in hand. Power lunch for the new boss? She smiled, momentarily letting go of her poised demeanor. Did you see the CNBC feature? He laughed, setting the sandwich down. Mom called me twice. First time to cry. Second time to scream. Natalie raised an eyebrow. Which came first? The crying. Always the crying. She chuckled, but her mind was already sifting through the next series of tasks. Legal reviews, internal restructuring meetings, press coordination, onboarding new department leads. The pace was relentless, but it was also exhilarating. "What about your dad?" she asked. Julian leaned back in the armchair across from her desk. "He's been telling everyone this was his strategy all along. Some kind of long game. He's calling it a strategic power handoff to the next generation." Natalie didn't respond. They both knew Richard had been blindsided, stripped of his imagined control, and forced to watch as his once dismissed daughter-in-law claimed a position of authority he never thought she deserved. Still, it didn't surprise her. People like Richard didn't apologize, they reframed. Retelling the story became the only way to survive it. That evening, Natalie sat at her desk long after the office had emptied. The city skyline glittered outside the window. Inside, silence reigned, except for the soft hum of Nestra's server interface running diagnostics on their newly integrated systems. She tapped a few keys, bringing up a dashboard: transaction velocity across retail banking divisions, fraud filter efficiency, cloud latency. The system was already optimizing Heverton's architecture in real time. And it was only day one. Just then, a notification flashed on her screen: private message, subject, from Margaret. She hesitated for a beat before clicking it open. "Natalie. I don't know what to say. You've clearly built something extraordinary. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. We didn't see you. Please understand it's just hard. We come from a world where success always looked a certain way. And you never fit that mold. But now I wonder if maybe the mold was the problem. Margaret." Natalie stared at the message, unsure how to feel. She'd waited years for even a flicker of acknowledgement. Now that it was here, it felt both validating and strangely hollow. Because the truth was, she hadn't needed their validation to succeed. She'd succeeded despite it. Still, she replied. "Thank you, Margaret. I understand. Molds break. That's how new things get made." In the weeks that followed, the transformation at Heverton accelerated. Paper files were digitized and encrypted. Customer service centers were retrained with Nestra's AI interface. Branch offices were redesigned into hybrid consultation hubs. Even the tone of the brand shifted: less legacy bank, more digital partner. Natalie oversaw it all. She appointed Julian as VP of Strategic Design, not because of his last name, but because he'd spent the last 2 years helping her prototype Nestra's front-end integrations. He earned his seat. Some changes were smoother than others. One week, a small group of senior executives tried to push back, subtly working behind the scenes to reinstate Richard as executive advisor. Natalie responded by releasing a performance audit showing how every one of those executives had stalled digital adoption for over 5 years. The advisory motion was dead within the hour. Even Richard had stopped showing up to board meetings. Rumor had it he'd retreated to the family estate, claiming to be on sabbatical. In reality, he was grappling with something men like him rarely acknowledged: irrelevance. One chilly morning, Natalie found herself in front of the same long table that once hosted a very different kind of family dinner. This time, she wasn't there for turkey or thinly veiled insults. She was hosting a round table with Heverton's new Tech and Innovation Council. The table was filled with fresh faces: young architects, developers, policy experts. Some wore sneakers. Others wore blazers. All of them were hungry to build, not just preserve. "Let's start with the small business interface," Natalie began. "We're rebuilding the onboarding flow for entrepreneurs who don't speak bank. I want language, tone, and features that meet people where they are. Think of your sister starting a bakery. Your friend opening a freelance design studio. What would they need from a bank cap on day one?" As ideas flowed around the room, Natalie felt something settle inside her, something strong and quiet and absolute. She wasn't running from legacy. She was rewriting it. One night, back at home, she found Julian in their backyard, grilling under the twinkle lights strung between oak trees. He handed her a glass of wine as she sat beside him. "You haven't said I told you so yet," he teased. She shook her head. I don't need to. He smiled, brushing a thumb across her hand. Do you think your dad would have been proud? Natalie looked up at the sky. Her father, a postal worker who saved every bonus to send her to Columbia, had passed away before she launched Nestra. But he'd always believed in her. Even when no one else did. I know he would. They sat in silence as the stars blinked awake. She thought of every woman who had been talked over, brushed aside, dismissed at dinner tables. Every visionary who dared to dream under the weight of skepticism. They were all here with her. And she was just getting started. The higher you rise, the quieter the world becomes. That was something Natalie Reid hadn't anticipated. Success, for all its bright headlines and stock market surges, came wrapped in a strange kind of silence. It wasn't the quiet of peace, it was the quiet of distance. Of space widening between the old and the new. Between who she was before, and who she was now. One morning, she sat alone in her newly renovated office, the corner one once belonging to Richard Pendleton, staring at the panoramic skyline. The walls were sleek and modern now. Glass shelves. A curated collection of architecture books. A hand-blown sculpture that Julian picked out for her. And in the corner, tucked discreetly away, the framed napkin sketch that started it all, the very first blueprint of Nestra's core architecture, drawn during a sleepless night at her kitchen table. The irony wasn't lost on her. This office had once been a symbol of everything she wasn't allowed to touch. Now it was hers, and it felt both powerful and heavy. She opened her inbox. Over 700 unread emails. CEOs from legacy firms asking for consultations. Investors hoping to buy into Nestra's next round. A handful of reporters requesting interviews. One even asked if they could shadow her for a day, calling her the quiet storm of fintech. She flagged it for later and kept scrolling. An email caught her eye, subject, urgent, concerns from Treasury and Risk Committee. Natalie's fingers paused over the trackpad. She opened it. Natalie. The committee is concerned about the pace of changes being implemented across Haverton's infrastructure. Some board members feel the integration timeline is too aggressive. There's also pushback from legal on the full migration of wealth management systems. We'd like to schedule an emergency strategy session this week. Clarissa Wu, VP Risk Management. Natalie leaned back in her chair. It wasn't surprising. Change always felt like chaos to those who had benefited from stillness. She tapped out a reply. Clarissa. Schedule it. And tell them this, fast doesn't mean reckless. It means prepared. Natalie. Later that day, in a glass conference room overlooking the city, the meeting commenced. The table was packed with familiar faces, Clarissa, two compliance officers, Haverton's interim legal chief, and, to her surprise, Richard Pendleton. He hadn't attended a formal meeting in weeks. Yet here he was, suit pressed, jaw tight, arms crossed like a statue carved from Wall Street marble. Let's begin, Clarissa said cautiously. Some members of the committee feel that the digital transformation, while impressive, is moving too quickly. There are concerns about institutional stability, client perception, and reputational risk. Natalie nodded. Understood. I assume these concerns come with specifics? A silence. Then Richard leaned forward. The wealth division doesn't want to migrate to your new platform. They don't trust the automation. Natalie folded her hands. Is that because the system is unstable, or because it threatens the way they justify their bonuses? A few people shifted uncomfortably. You can't just bulldoze everything overnight, Richard said. There's legacy here. Yes, Natalie said calmly, and legacy is only valuable if it adapts. Otherwise, it's just trust with good PR. Clarissa jumped in quickly, perhaps a phased approach. We've already done phased, Natalie said, her tone sharpening. We've run simulations. Migration now means a 30% reduction in long-term loss. Waiting even 2 quarters costs us millions. Risk doesn't vanish by slowing down, it just changes shape. Richard's eyes flared. You think you know more than people who've been running banks for decades? I don't think, Richard, she said, voice like ice. I know. Because while you were sipping scotch and handing out business cards at the country club, I was analyzing financial behavior in real time. I watched what people wanted, what they clicked, when they churned, how they stayed. You read market trends. I built the system they use. The room went still. Then Clarissa slowly nodded. I'll inform the committee. Full migration moves forward. Richard stood, slamming his folder closed. You'll regret this. Natalie didn't flinch. No, Richard. You'll regret not seeing it sooner. That evening, Julian found her on their back porch, staring into the fire pit. You okay? He asked gently. She didn't look at him. There's this pressure, she said, this invisible weight. Like no matter how much I prove, it's still not enough. Every decision is questioned. Every risk is political. I don't get to be wrong, Julian. Not even once. He sat beside her. That's what it means to lead. Especially when you're not who they expected. She finally met his eyes. Sometimes I wonder if I've become too much of what I fought against. Fast, blunt, unapologetic. I used to believe success could be gentle. Julian gave a soft laugh. You didn't win by being gentle. You won by being smart. Being underestimated doesn't mean you have to shrink. It means you get to surprise them. Weeks passed. The migration completed. Customers praised the new mobile tools. The system reduced fraud cases by 40% and slashed internal processing time by over 60%. But the pressure didn't ease. Natalie learned how lonely success could be. She received awards from fintech councils, but they came with awkward speeches from men who once ignored her. She was invited to elite roundtables, but found herself as the only woman, and often the youngest person in the room. There were congratulations, yes, but also constant reminders that she was lucky to have made it. And yet, in the quiet moments, she remembered her purpose. She hadn't done this for applause. She'd done it to create space for other women, for silent builders, for those with dreams wrapped in data and drive. Every late night, every condescending dinner, every smug remark at holiday parties, it had all led to this. Not revenge. Redirection. One night, she received a package. Inside was an old book. No note. No explanation. The cover was worn leather, the title faded. But when she opened it, she recognized the handwriting immediately. Her father's. Inside the front cover, a note. To Natalie. Build it your way. And don't ask to be invited. Make your own door. She held the book to her chest and let herself cry for the first time in months. Not from exhaustion. From remembering. The Nestra-Haverton merger became a case study at universities within 6 months. Harvard Business School called it the most elegant digital pivot of the decade. Wharton labeled it a silent revolution in legacy finance. But Natalie Reid didn't attend those panels or wave from podiums. She didn't need applause. Her validation came in metrics, in users served, in lives made easier because someone dared to challenge the mold. And, most importantly, in the ripple effect. 1 year after the acquisition, Haverton Bank was no longer just surviving, it was leading. Branches had transformed into client experience hubs. Mortgage approvals happened in under 24 hours. Small business loan access increased 50%, especially in underserved neighborhoods, thanks to Nestra's adaptive lending AI. The once rigid institution had become responsive, humane, even visionary. All because someone they once mocked for selling candles dared to rewire the future. Natalie sat alone in what used to be a quiet corner of her office, now converted into a glass-walled idea lounge. On the low table before her sat the original blueprint of Nestra, printed, laminated, and framed. Around it, a group of junior analysts and product interns were brainstorming for the next quarterly rollout. She loved this part. Not the boardroom speeches or the media flashes. But this, a dozen hungry minds tossing around the impossible like it was just another day. She saw herself in them, scrappy, curious, underestimated. She leaned in. What if the new onboarding system could rewrite itself based on how users answer the first 3 questions? A young woman proposed. Like a branching logic that adapts in real time. Natalie grinned. That's it. Build it. Test it. Make it fast and invisible. The girl beamed. She didn't know that the woman encouraging her used to be laughed at for building websites in pajamas. Didn't know that she once sat in rooms full of people who smiled at her while dismissing her completely. But that was the whole point. You break the mold not to become the new gatekeeper, but to leave the gate open behind you. Later that evening, Natalie walked into the once imposing Pendleton estate. It had been months since she'd stepped foot in the marble-lined foyer. Nothing had changed. The furniture still reeked of wealth. The portraits still loomed like judges on high. But the energy was different. She was greeted by a butler, not with hesitation, but with warm deference. "Ms. Reed, welcome back." Margaret met her near the grand staircase. "You look powerful," she said, tone a mix of admiration and apology. "I am," Natalie replied simply. "Julian's in the library. He's expecting you." The room where Richard used to hold court was now lined with tablets and books on fintech policy. In the center sat Julian, reviewing the latest philanthropic initiative Nestra was co-funding, a financial literacy project for public high schools. He looked up and smiled. "How was the campus meeting?" "Humbling," she said. "There was a student from Ohio who built her first payment interface on our sandbox tools. She's 16. Julian chuckled. "She'll be replacing you in 3 years." "Probably," Natalie grinned. Just then, the door creaked. Richard entered. Older. Smaller than she remembered. The fire had gone from his voice. But his eyes. They held something new. Something hard for a man like him, recognition. "I suppose," he said quietly, "that I owe you an apology." Natalie didn't move. "You suppose?" He gave a slight nod. "I didn't understand what you were building. I only saw what I expected to see. And I was wrong." Natalie studied him. "I didn't build Nestra to prove you wrong, Richard. I built it because too many people get ignored when they don't fit the mold." He sat slowly in the leather chair across from her. "Is it too late for someone like me to learn?" Natalie's voice softened. "It's only too late if you stop listening." The next morning, Natalie launched her most personal project yet, Blueprint. A free, open-access incubator for overlooked entrepreneurs, especially women, immigrants, and dreamers who didn't speak the right language of power. It offered access to Nestra's tools, mentorship from staff, even early-stage funding matched by Haverdin's new community branch initiative. Within a week, the applications poured in. The first approved startup was from a Latina seamstress in New Mexico who designed adaptive clothing for children with sensory disorders. The second was a rural Kenyan farmer developing a digital seed marketplace. Natalie cried reading them. Not because they reminded her of where she came from, but because they confirmed what she always believed: the future is built by those who aren't invited to the table, but show up anyway. Months passed. Nestra's valuation crossed $100 billion. Natalie refused to take it public. "Not yet. Control is not about cashing out," she told Julian one night. "It's about keeping the mission intact." He nodded, knowing better than to argue. She still kept Prairie Halo running. Not because she needed the income, but because it was the best testing ground in the world. Every new tool was piloted there first, masked in the warmth of candles and hand-woven blankets. Her customer support system, now globally licensed, was still powered by the very same core script she wrote on a rainy Sunday 4 years ago. Lucille finally called her one afternoon, frustrated her country club app had stopped working after Nestra quietly acquired the platform's payment processor. "I can't log in," she snapped. Natalie smiled. "We'll get you set up with something modern. Prairie Halo's support team is exceptional." Lucille never mocked it again. 1 year to the day of the acquisition, Natalie stood on stage at a small, private conference hosted by a nonprofit incubator. She didn't give a TED Talk. No lights. No fanfare. Just a stool, a mic, and a story. "If you've ever been underestimated," she said, "keep building. You don't need to prove anyone wrong to be right. You don't need permission to be powerful. Let your work speak. A beat. And if they don't see you coming, even better." That's how revolutions begin. The room erupted in quiet, reverent applause. Natalie stepped off the stage, not into spotlight, but into momentum. Because legacy isn't what you inherit. It's what you design. And the best way to change the game is to stop asking to play theirs, and build your own.